Good to see you as always, Kat. Thank you for having me. Truly appreciate it. And I'll start off with an apology. There are so many things about this that burn me to my core at this point. I am a public speaker and a resilience coach, as well as a martial artist for life. But I am accustomed to speaking to large crowds and interacting with the crowd, and staring at a camera with my microphone in my studio brings back memories of a time that I don't want to talk about, when we were trying to keep a full contact business going on camera so that everybody could stay healthy and safe. So usually I'm very animated. I like to move around and gesture, postulate and interact with the crowd, and there's no crowd to interact with. So I'll do my best to not stammer and stumble through my speech. So one of the things I always appreciate about events like this is to sit back and listen, which is a huge part of the martial arts. Listen to yourself internally, to listen to the world around you, and to watch and listen to other people, and to hear other people's stories and their journeys through chronic pain. You can't describe that to someone who hasn't experienced chronic pain in their life. You can't explain to them what chronic pain is all about, no matter how hard you try and how articulate you are. But for us to hear and understand, to hear our stories in other people's stories is uplifting in an odd way. So I initially intended on calling this, excuse me, calling this talk Bookends, because that's also, I've thought about my story so many times in the last several years. As I started my life in chronic pain, and I had the luck to have a respite from my pain for very many years. And now I'm back on that chronic pain journey in a new and exciting way. And I spent the last couple of years thinking in that manner, that I can't believe that I started my life with chronic pain, and now the potential to end my life in chronic pain with that time in the middle. But I had to change it because I refused to focus on my chronic illness, insofar as thinking that this is going to be with me for the rest of my life. If it is, it is, and that's something that I will deal with. I'm trying to forward look to get through this. I try to deal with everything as naturally, as physically as possible. Diet and exercise has always been the core tenet of getting through illness, as far as I'm concerned. The hardest part is that although we all share similar stories, even if we had the same exact symptoms, even if we had the same exact illnesses, the way we go about healing can be so completely different. We are so very, very different in how our bodies react to everything that we put in it. And that includes the things you put in your ears, not just what you eat and your exercise level. So I suppose I'll start by sharing my story, so similar to everybody else's story here. Going way back to the very beginning, I was able to sit down and speak with my mom at length about my childhood once I was old enough to understand what was going on with me, get through it, and then later on in life sit down and really go over what my childhood was like. So I was, my mom described me as what would be called a colicky baby. From the second I was born, I cried nonstop. I drove my parents up a wall. One of the only ways that they could calm me as an infant was to put me in a dark room, cover a bassinet with a blanket, keep me in silence, and sometimes I would settle down and sleep. As I grew older, I was kind of an antisocial kid. And one of the things that really drew my attention to understanding my journey in the very beginning was when I sat down to speak with my mom about my illness when I was a child, when I realized that I was ill. She said, you always used to make that face. And of course, I didn't understand what that face was. She went about hunting down a bunch of photographs, and photograph after photograph from the time I was a small child all the way through grade school. Every photograph of me looking anywhere near the camera was wrinkled head, furrowed brow, a look that most people would describe as anger constantly. So in grade school, in kindergarten, I was kind of an antisocial kid. I was most often found either sitting in the corner, playing on my own, or sitting quietly. And if you had asked me what my most favorite part of school was, I would have said nap time. When they put us down, I would pull a shirt over my head and try and shut out the din. And then finally it was quiet, and I couldn't understand why nap time couldn't be our entire class. Yet hadn't really gotten to the point that I was ill yet. I of course only remember bits and pieces of all of this. A lot of it was given back to me third hand. I know and remember that I had tremendous tactile issues. I did not like to be touched in any way, shape, or form. Made me feel like my skin crawled, and at times it felt like there was a lot more impact than there was. Through my time in my grade school, if I were to describe my grade school to those of you that understand chronic migraine, our grade school was cinder block walls painted in bright colors with a super high gloss put on the outside. Most times when we had breaks, they would repaint parts of the school and put that high gloss right back on the walls again. Fluorescent lights. I can still now, at my middle age, hear the frequency that the fluorescent lights would hum at, the way the light reflected off the walls. And again, not addressing my sickness, because it was round about probably between 4th and 5th grade where I had a teacher approach me and ask me if I was okay, my teacher at the time. And she was really the first teacher that ever took any kind of care into my behavior, which we won't get into. I was, I guess, would have been considered a troublemaker. Even at a young age, I got into more fist fights and scraps with people, mostly due to my intolerance of other people around me. So weird how you can remember certain things from your life and certain people. So decades ago, I can still remember the name of the teacher and the name of the individual that gave me the insight, or made me realize that I was really different from the other kids around me. Because it was round about that time, it was round about 5th grade, where I started communicating with the other kids around me, which I hadn't done a lot of through the beginning of my grade school. And most of my questions at that point to the other kids were questions about how they were coping with the noises and the smells and the sounds. Not so much on focusing on what the teacher had to say. I spent most of my time not really paying attention to the teachers and what they had to say. because, again, I didn't realize that I was sick at that point. It was the other kids who, if I wasn't deemed that strange, pale kid in the corner from the beginning, once I started talking to the kids around me, that's where that story came from. Trying to ask the other kids, like, how can you listen to the teacher when that sound that is like ear-piercing, so loud? How are you even paying attention to the teacher? And of course, they don't hear what I'm talking about. Being in the cafeteria was so overwhelming. When I was in my cycles back then, my hearing would become so acute. And I've always had an issue with my hearing where large groups, it can be very confusing for me because I can't hear the person in front of me who's speaking, but I can hear conversations from 50 feet away as if they were speaking with a megaphone in my ear. But with the migraines, that made things very interesting. So round about that 5th grade mark was where I was introduced to 2 new people in my life. One was the truant officer, because I spent a lot of time in bed. And since my mom was a single parent at the time, she couldn't cope. There was no real way for her to get me to school. Nowadays, they would consider latchkey kids child abuse. I mean, we were the latchkey kid generation. We basically took care of ourselves at home to start with. So I made the choice not to go to school as often as physically possible, whether I was capable to or not. So it was around about that 5th or 6th grade mark where I was introduced to Mr. Fox, the school psychologist. And I can remember the day. We were just a few sessions into speaking. I can remember the day where I realized that there was an issue. And of all things, it was he understood that when I would come into the room, he would shut the lights off. We would sit in the dark and speak. And that was born from my almost daily visits with the nurse from that grade school, who had an interesting insight into what was wrong with me. But I would come into her office every day, shut all the lights off. Her desk was around the corner. She knew when the light shut off that I was the one that was there, and the daily grind would begin. A few days I spent in school. I'd go to the nurse as soon as physically possible. She, of course, thought there was no way that a kid could be sick every day, even though I was throwing up regularly and pretty much non-functional, but I learned to get up and get around and function. Once the truant officer kicked in, that's when my mom really realized that there must be, something going on with me. Even my mom, who was kind of liberal in her approach to dealing with illness and conflict, she started by believing the adults around us that I may be, putting on a show, and then very quickly realized there's no way that a child could have that much dedication or hatred of school to fake the condition that he's in, and started the journey. That's when I realized I wasn't like the other kids, because my questions to the other kids were questions about how they were coping with life, and they didn't understand what I was asking about. And that separated me from the other kids as much as possible. I've always been a huge advocate of, you don't need a ton of friends, you just need one good one. Yeah, even my best friend at the time, he knew what I was going through, but even he couldn't understand it. Still with me, and still my best friend to this day. So huge shout out to that. Also a martial artist for life. So it's probably around 6th grade where the doctors got involved in my case. And once the doctors were involved, like so many other people out there, childhood migraine was kind of unheard of. I think even realizing that migraine was a real thing was in its infancy back then. So I have blurry memories of some of the tests that they put me through. I remember my first brain scan because it was a raging migraine day, and the sound of the machine would make you absolutely batty. They run their battery of diagnostic tests, and the first answer was ibuprofen. They put me on a fair dose of ibuprofen, and as it turns out, I'm one in a bajillion people that in the world that is allergic to ibuprofen. So that made me even sicker. That was my first real foray into being on medication. And when they realized that the ibuprofen wasn't going to work, they immediately started with painkiller medications that moved into anti-seizure meds, and a host of other medications that I would take, not really get any benefit from. But once they started with the narcotic-based drugs, even at a young age, I found myself secretly taking more meds than I was supposed to take in the hopes that it would make me feel better, made me feel different. And when the meds ran out, even then, the fear of being caught for over-medicating and the fear that they'd take the meds away led into me finding my own way to medicate on the street. And that led to questions that I still have to this day. So moving through grade school into high school, I decided that doctors weren't for me, and that street drugs probably did better for me than anything that the doctors could. My issues with authority back then were pretty thick. So anybody in a suit and tie or a white coat, not a whole lot of respect for, and not a lot of I didn't spend a lot of time listening to those people around me. And round about high school age, so probably getting in the ninth grade or so, my migraine cycle was anywhere between 15 to 20 days with a continual migraine, and then the hangover from the migraine would easily last anywhere between 5 and 7 days. I'd get a day or two of respite, and then the aura would start, and the cycle would just start 100% all over again. It was when I, in high school, discovered hallucinogenics. And I know there's a ton of studies now, which kind of makes me giggle when I read and continue to educate myself on chronic migraine, cluster headaches, chronic pain in general, that people are now using low-dose hallucinogenics to break their cycles, especially when it comes to cluster headaches. Because now I wonder, once I got through my foray and was able to beat, with the help of someone else, I was able to beat my addictions and fight my way through that into sobriety. And once I fought my way into that, as I went through puberty, adding on that part of my journey into stopping the hardcore drugs, my migraine cycles started to spread out. Something that the doctors said was childhood migraine. I didn't care what it was, whether it was, I knew it wasn't getting away from the drugs, but I knew the drugs weren't helping me. Once my cycles started to spread out, before I found the the clarity, the confusion was so thick because I realized at a young age that I didn't really understand what feeling okay was. And it was, I found that hard to mentally and physically cope with. Once I wasn't in pain all the time, I had to learn how to be social and do things that I had never done without pain or illness before. So once I found that clarity, once I started getting more good days and the hangover would pass without a new headache, I still found myself smoking a lot of marijuana. Once, anytime any kind of headache cycle would start, I would start smoking immediately, and that oftentimes would, of course, force me to eat something that I don't do when I'm sick. I really have to watch myself when it comes to that. So once that ended, if you can say, I dove into work. I found myself more addicted to going to work and working hard than taking drugs every day. And like I said, the middle, once I was through my 20s, and in my 30s, migraines almost seemed like a thing of the past. I got to the point where if I had 2 or 3 a year, it was a lot. I found them harder to cope with once I had that clarity in between, and that would mentally break me down from time to time. But then when I realized, hey, if I'm only going to get a couple of these a year, I'm down for that. And then it went to the point where 1 a year, 2 a year max, almost to the point where I had to sit down and really think about when was the last time I had a migraine. It's kind of crazy. So later on in life, in the not so recent past, my headaches started coming back again, and they were so few and far between. So few and far between that I actually thought that it was allergies at first, and now it's progressed into pain, puking. I don't have a cycle per se, but fast forward through a really long story, I have several comorbidities going on, and I don't know if the migraines were part of that when I was a kid, or if this is a whole new cycle. So I started having pain and pins and needles and starting in my hands. And I always just wrote it off at this point in my life as, I'm pounding on my hands every day. We're cranking each other's wrists, throwing each other around, punching, kicking. If I complained about my pain, I would have a lot to say every day. So it got to the point where I realized that the pain in my hands wasn't just from my lifestyle. I went to see somebody. Again, running batteries of tests. They come to find that I have syringohydromyelia. The brain and spine specialist was convinced that all of my problems were coming from that syringohydromyelia. You're the expert. It is what it is. And then my symptoms started to progress and get worse into not being able to regulate my body temperature. The migraines again coming back, and chronic pain in my joints, deep bone pain. So many. My list of symptoms is so broad and not worth getting into. But the point here is, of course, that doctor thought, this is what you have. This is the be-all, end-all answer. It is the cause to all of your problems, even though those things are progressing. By year 2 or year 3, in looking at the syrinx in my spine, it had stayed completely stable. You can be born with them. Sometimes they come from trauma, and there are other things that cause them, and they can't really quantify. But I knew deep down that what was going on with me was not the syringohydromyelia, but I'm not an expert. I'm just me. when I asked him, correct me if I'm wrong, but all these other issues that are going on with me couldn't be coming from the syrinx. He said, I'm going to correct you, you're wrong. And I kind of put my foot down and said, I understand you're the expert, but I just have this feeling deep inside me that that there's something else going on. So once again, fast forward, it turns out I have a few layered autoimmune diseases on top of the syringohydromyelia. Like so many other things, not too many that they can nail down. Many of them are secondary, and we're still testing to really try to figure out what is going on. But at the end of the day, had I listened to this doctor, I would have been in a much worse place now because of the cure or the help that they would have offered me in trying to stop the syringohydromyelia. And full disclosure, we still don't know if it's the syringohydromyelia that's causing my problems. But we do know that there are other issues going on. So all of that to say, what we really need to do as people who are dealing with chronic pain on a day-to-day basis, understanding that doctors, even with the best intentions, are very overwhelmed and very undereducated in many subjects that pertain to mental and physical health. Experts in their own field have a tendency to be very tunnel vision, and I'm a big proponent of, if you're looking for something hard enough, you will always find it. So one of the things that I believe that we all need to work on, and this is a tenet in the martial arts, which if you ask Kat, she'll back me up on this. Martial arts is my life. And when most people think about martial arts, they think about us punching and kicking the living hell out of one another. And as much as that is part of the martial arts, you have to break it down. The word martial in its context means of war. It is the art of war, and there is an art to war. And war is the metaphor for life, because our entire lives are conflict, war, and peaceful times in between. But one of the things we really need to do is learn how to listen to the voice inside of us while we're also listening to these experts, but understanding that these experts, they're not experts in you. They don't understand you the way you do. Many of us have a hard time articulating and or going through the litany of how we feel on a day-to-day basis, or understanding our pain scales are completely different. We've all seen the memes and the tropes online, and every one of them will elicit a chuckle with your morning coffee, because yeah, if you ask most of us how we're feeling and we're dying on the inside, we'll say, I feel fine. I feel great. To us, most of us, great means I was able to pick my head up off the pillow and come and look you in the face today. Other people's great may be something completely different. At the end of the day, I, of course, I don't recommend hunting down street drugs and trying to correct your problems. But I'm also the first one to say, question every medication that a doctor is going to give you. Do your research. I love and hate the internet. I hate the internet because I believe it's ruined society. That's a subject for another time. I also love the internet because it gives people like us the opportunity to hook up with and privately speak with other people who are going through everything that we're going through in some way, shape, or form. People who have had to deal with medical fatigue and If I go to one more doctor and they write out a script without even looking at me or talking to me, or if I go to see a specialist and they ask me what the issue is and I realize they haven't even looked at my file before I've come in, and to have to sit down and tell the story, or God forbid, to talk about the symptoms, that again, we could sit for a half an hour and just talk about symptoms and how they morph and change. But at the end of the day, we can all get through this, not only by supporting one another, but understanding that we're not alone. And I know that that doesn't help us with our physical pain, but we also know that physical pain is a very small part of chronic illness. In these situations, I'm often reminded of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If anyone's aware of what Maslow's hierarchy of needs is, most people, if you look it up, you'll see a picture of a pyramid, kind of like our food pyramid. And what Maslow did was list the things that we as human beings need to survive, amongst other things, built on a foundation and working its way up. And you need to have each and every layer from the bottom up in order to succeed mentally and physically. And of course, physiological needs is the first thing, and that's something in this country that the majority of us, of course not everybody, but the majority of us enjoy, and hopefully we can figure out how to get other people to enjoy those things as well. But it's the second part of the pyramid, the safety factor, the safety needs. That's where most of us struggle, because part of safety needs is health and well-being. And when you live with chronic pain, you never feel healthy. Your sense of well-being is questionable at best, even when you're mentally and physically resilient. But we can get through it. It's hard not to beat the hell out of yourself or ask, why me? Or, am I ever going to get through this? The bottom line is we have to power through. Even if it's small victories, like being able to sit up on the edge of your bed, without feeling like you're going to pass out. It's those small victories that we can hold on to and build into bigger victories. Doctors, they're never going to understand us. A guy like me has always been, I've always taken good care of my body to the best of my ability. Once I stopped beating the heck out of it with illicit drugs, I went the other way and got addicted to really taking care of my body, and I even overdid that. So everything in moderation. But these doctors, if I had $1 for every time I asked a doctor for myself or for someone else, what about diet and exercise? What can I change about my lifestyle that would help me with this illness? I can see myriad looks on myriad faces, and all of them in the confusion category. But not to say that diet and exercise is the be-all, end-all, the saving grace. But it's an important part of our lives. But even at that, diet and exercise is different for absolutely all of us. Nobody can tell us, short of not ingesting chemicals that are made from a laboratory that they have paid for the right to call natural. All of our diets are so completely different. It doesn't matter our dynamic, our class, our where we come from in the world, what we eat, and our need for exercise is so different that it's not something we can quantify. It's not something that we could say, hey, if everybody ate this, they'd be healthy and they'd live another several positive years. You have to go through that journey for yourself, and it is insanely difficult, like all the lessons I teach. We can boil it down and make it sound simple in words, but to actually live it, you first have to understand that you're going to screw it up, and it's going to be really hard. Even when you start to see success, it can be really hard. But self-care is by far one of the most important things that I have found through the years to be helpful in so many ways. And that's different for absolutely all of us also. So if I had anything to say in my closing, it would be, look at every day as the first step of your journey. Question everything, but from a logical standpoint. We can get through this journey. If you need the drugs to get through the journey, it can be so helpful for some people. My own viewpoint on that is that even after all of this time, I'd still like to go the natural route, and I'm still struggling with that. If I need medications, it's not something I'm against, but I'm a fighter at heart. Excuse me. So I personally will fight to stay non-medicated for as long as I physically can until it starts physically doing damage to my body. I'll do everything I can to avoid it. But the fact of the matter is, eventually I may need it. I will need it, most likely. And there starts the next step in the journey. But at the end of the day, when you need somebody to lean on, there's always someone to lean on when it comes to chronic pain and migraine. Kat founding this organization and advocating for people with migraines and chronic pain is a tremendous contribution to the community. And again, because it all boils down to other people being able to hear your story, you being able to hear other people's story, and realizing you're not alone in this journey. You're never alone, even in those moments where no one can convince you that you are not alone. And there's always a way through it. It's never going to be easy, but you can always get yourself through, even when it feels like there's no outlet. So I really want to thank you guys for taking the time to listen to my story. Sorry, brain fog.